Now let's take a look at another class of selector called pseudo selectors. Pseudo selectors are a type of selector that just doesn't fall into any other category. So they select different types of things. They select states of things, properties of things, things like that. For example, in the anchor tag, and here we're looking at a XHTML file that has an anchor tag in it. Here's an anchor tag with a link to a website, happens to be my website. You'll notice when we look at this in the browser that it's underlined and it's in blue. And if I click on the link and then come back to it, it's now a different color. That's because it's in its visited state. And the unvisited state for this purposes is called a link state. And so I'm going to go ahead and reset my history in my browser so that this is again in its unvisited state. There we go. And let's go and play with this in CSS and see what we can do with it. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll select the anchor tag with the tag selector. Of course, we could use a class selector for this, and we'll set the link state. So the link state, and we'll give it a color of, say, red. And so now all anchor tags that are in the unvisited state, the link state, are going to have a color of red. And when I reload over here, we now see that that's red. And if I go ahead and select it in its visited state, and this should say visited, color is green. Now, this is the pseudo selector. So link is its unvisited state, and visited is its visited state, and it'll have a different color, green, now in its visited state. So I'll reload, it's still red, and I'll go and I'll come back, and now it's green because that's its visited state, and we've changed that. Now we can have yet another one for the hover state. Make it blue in the hover state. And so now when I hover the mouse over it, you see it turns to blue. All right, so its unvisited state is red, its visited state is green, and the hover state is blue. So when I'm hovering over it, it's blue like that. Now, commonly, what people will do is they'll do something like this, and they'll say text decoration none. And so that will get rid of the underline. And in fact, because this is just the A tag selector, it'll get rid of the underline for all of these. So I'll go ahead and save that and reload over here. Now there's no underline, but we still have the color thing happening. And if you want to, you could have it just underline in one of these states, like in the hover state, for example. You could say text decoration underline. And reload over here. Now when I hover over it, it will get underlined. So there's all kinds of things you can do. You can highlight, you can change the background, you can make it bold, you can do all these different things depending on the different states, and that's all done with these pseudo selectors. There are other types of pseudo selectors, of course, and throughout the course we will cover some of the pseudo selectors as we come across them in the different sections. But just to give you an idea, you'll notice that in the XHTML file here, I've created a class called first for the first paragraph. And obviously I've not used that class anyplace else. It's just for the first paragraph in this section. And so in the CSS, I can use a selector to select that like this. But I can also use a pseudo selector to select just the first line. And I can do something interesting with that. So now the first line of that paragraph will be in small caps. And there we have it. And you'll notice that as I change the size of the browser, that first line will still be in caps, but these words here, as I make the browser smaller, will no longer be in the first line, and they won't be in small caps anymore. So what the first line is depends on the actual rendering in real time of the browser. And so this is a lot of the uses for pseudo selectors. Pseudo selectors are used for things that aren't covered by other types of selectors, and they're very powerful. And at the different levels of CSS, more and more pseudo selectors are introduced. And as we go through the course, the pseudo selectors that apply to the different chapters that we're talking about will be covered in those areas.